It all started when I joined Nexus Corp as a junior analyst last fall. That's where I met Jake, a charming, outgoing guy who had been hired around the same time. We hit it off immediately, bonding over our shared love of obscure indie movies and 80s synth pop. Hey, have you seen that new sci-fi flick everyone's raving about? Jake leaned over my cubicle partition one morning, that mischievous grin plastered across his face. I was thinking we could catch it together after work tonight, if you're free. I felt my cheeks flush slightly as I met his piercing blue eyes. Yeah, that could be fun, I replied, trying to sound nonchalant. From then on, Jake and I became inseparable work buddies. He'd swing by my desk every few hours to chat, or we'd grab lunch together in the bizarrely silent office cafeteria. I loved how he could make even the most mundane conversations feel like witty exchanges from a classic rom-com. A month into our friendship, the texting began. At first, it was just silly memes or links to articles we'd discussed. But soon, Jake was messaging me constantly. Before work, after work, sometimes even late at night when I'd be lying awake, staring at the ceiling. You up? His text would ping through around midnight. I can't stop thinking about that crazy plot twist we were talking about earlier. And so we'd launch into these epic, rambling dissections of whatever movie or show had captured our imagination that week. I'd get drowsy-eyed from staring at my phone screen, but I never wanted our conversations to end. There was just something about Jake that made me feel alive, stimulated, understood. Part of me wondered if he felt the same electric spark between us. The chemistry seemed undeniable. But was I misreading the signs? Projecting my own hopeless romantic fantasies onto a platonic work friendship? I tried not to read too much into his frequent texts or lingering looks. Jake was probably just an incorrigible flirt who oozed that easy charm with everyone. Until one fateful night in early December, when everything changed. It was the annual Nexus Corp holiday party, and the dance floor was packed with drunk coworkers awkwardly shuffling to Jingle Bell Rock. I stood off to the side, nursing a vodka cranberry, trying my best to fade into the garish tinsel backdrop. Parties had never been my scene. I much preferred the solitude of my apartment and a good book. There you are! I turned to see Jake striding towards me, a bright smile on his face. He looked devastating in a crisp black suit, his unruly chestnut locks falling roguishly over his forehead. My heart stuttered in my chest. I've been looking everywhere for you, Jake said, taking my hand and leading me towards the dance floor. We need to get you out there showing off those moves. I laughed nervously. You know I've got 2 left feet. I'll just embarrass myself. Nonsense. He pulled me close, placing his hands on my hips. Just follow my lead. We swayed together clumsily as Santa Baby began pumping through the speakers. Jake grinned down at me, his electric blue eyes sparking with mischief. I could smell his crisp cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body. I'd never been this physically close to him before. You clean up pretty nice, you know, he murmured in my ear, sending a shiver down my spine. Before I could respond, Jake spun me outwards, then whipped me back against his chest. Desire pooled hot and hungry in my belly as I gazed up at him breathlessly. In that moment, I wanted nothing more than to fist my hands in his shirt and drag his mouth down to mine. The song ended and we broke apart, slightly flushed. I need some air, Jake said gruffly. Come with me. He took my hand and led me through a side door out to the deserted parking lot. The cool night air was a relief after the stifling heat of the party. We walked a few paces in silence before Jake turned to face me, an unreadable expression on his face. Listen, I've been wanting to get something off my chest, he said quietly. My heart jackhammered. This was it. The moment I'd been desperately hoping for and dreading all at once. Jake opened his mouth to continue, but was interrupted by the shrill ringing of his phone. He frowned and pulled it from his pocket, his face falling as he glanced at the caller ID. Sorry. I need to take this, he muttered, turning away from me. I strained to hear his muffled voice as he answered tensely. Hey, no, everything's fine. Yes, I know I promised I'd be home by now. As the call dragged on, the knot in my stomach twisted tighter and tighter. I could no longer ignore the sick suspicion that had been gnawing at me since that first late-night text long ago. Jake had someone else in his life, a significant other he'd carefully omitted from our conversations. Until now. When he finally ended the call and turned back to me with an apologetic look, I could barely meet his gaze. All the fervent hope I'd been nurturing inside instantly shriveled and died. "Sorry about that," he said with a tight smile. My wife, actually. She gets a little anxious if I'm out too late without checking in." So there it was, the brutal truth that shattered my romantic reveries into pieces. I stared at Jake numbly as the first prickles of tears burned my eyes. How could I have been so naive? Of course, someone like him was already spoken for. "Hey, are you okay?" Jake's concerned voice felt like it was coming from another reality. I blinked rapidly, pasting on my best convincingly casual smile. "Yeah, of course. Sorry, I just got something in my eye." The lies tumbled out so easily, because deep down, I knew the ugly truth was too humiliating to admit, even to myself. I had fallen for a married man, and there was nothing more pathetic than that. In the weeks after the disastrous holiday party, I did my best to avoid Jake as much as possible around the office. I started taking my lunch breaks at odd hours, ducking into vacant conference rooms just to steer clear of those piercing blue eyes and that devastatingly crooked grin. Seeing him only reopened the fresh wound of embarrassment and longing that I was desperately trying to bury. Of course, avoidance wasn't easy when Jake seemed to actively seek me out at every turn. He'd appear beside my desk with that familiar concerned crease between his brows. "Hey, is everything okay? You've been really distant lately." I'd mumble some vague excuse about a heavy workload or feeling under the weather, never meeting his gaze for too long. Because if I did, I knew the stubborn embers of hope would reignite in my chest, despite my best efforts to snuff them out. The texts gradually dwindled from Jake as well, a fact that should have been a relief, but instead felt like a visceral loss. I'd catch myself instinctively checking my phone throughout the day, my heart plummeting a little more each time his name didn't light up the screen. It was for the best, I tried to convince myself. This was the universal karmic price to be paid for harboring inappropriate feelings for an unavailable man. A man who was permanently off limits. At least that was my mentality until the texts started up again one random Thursday morning. "Good morning, beautiful." Jake's message danced across my lock screen as my phone buzzed insistently from my nightstand. I froze in bed, clutching the covers tightly as a dangerous fluttering unfurled in my stomach. No, he couldn't be. Could he? Against my better judgment, I found myself rapidly typing back, "Morning? What are you up to tonight?" Suddenly have a craving for Thai food. A craving for Thai food? My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself think straight. Jake knew my favorite cuisine was Thai. In fact, our first real bonding session was spent geeking out over the merits of drunken noodles versus pad CU. This was unmistakably flirtatious behavior. But didn't he have a wife? A woman he had sworn fidelity and commitment to? I thought back to that humiliating night in the parking lot when my romantic daydreams about Jake had come crashing down. Maybe he was unhappily married and seeking an escape through me. Maybe this was all just a harmless fantasy to him, a thrill to be relished before inevitably returning to his real life. Or maybe, just maybe, my torrid imagination was just blowing an innocuous text completely out of proportion, playing tricks on my lust-addled brain to convince me there were hints of something more than friendship. "Thai sounds good," I responded after much internal dithering. "Are you asking me out on a date? Lover boy." I instantly cringed at sending something so transparently flirtatious and reminiscent of the splashy Hallmark rom-coms I secretly adored. But to my surprise, Jake's reply pinged back almost immediately. "Maybe I am. You free at 8? My legs turned to jelly. This was really happening. I was being undeniably asked out by the man who had starred in so many of my wistful daydreams at work. The man who I had tried so stubbornly to purge from my thoughts and desires. I took a deep, steadying breath before typing back the words that could potentially lead me down a treacherous path. "It's a date." The date with Jake was electrifying. We met at a hole-in-the-wall Thai place he'd discovered, trading bassoon recommendations and dissecting our favorite Kubrick films over plates of pad Thai and giant bottles of Singa. The conversation flowed as naturally as it always did between us, But there was an undercurrent of sparkly tension, of loaded pauses and lingering glances. At one point, Jake reached across the sticky tablecloth and placed his hand over mine. "I've missed this," he said huskily. "Missed you." I felt a rush of delirious excitement rolled up in guilt. This man was married. I was willfully engaging in an emotional affair at the very least. But the way Jake looked at me with those smoldering blue eyes, IT, made me forget about consequences and morality. It made me feel cherished, desired, alive. After boxing up the leftovers, Jake surprised me by taking my hand and leading me down a dimly lit alley. I opened my mouth to ask where we were going, but he just smirked and pulled me closer until my back was against the rough brick wall. "I've been going crazy thinking about doing this all night," he murmured, before capturing my lips in a searing kiss. It was like striking a match to a pool of gasoline. Suddenly, every fiber of my being was consumed by primal want, by the urgent need to touch and taste every inch of him. Jake kissed with an intense, demanding hunger, slipping his hands under my shirt as he pinned me harder against the wall. We were totally exposed in that dirty alleyway, open to see from the street and any passers-by. The thrill of being potentially caught only heightened the forbidden eroticism of it all. When we finally tore apart, chests heaving, Jake rested his forehead against mine. "God, I've wanted you for so long," he rasped ardently. "You have no idea." In that moment, I was powerless to resist him, powerless to question the reality of his marital status or my role as the other woman. All I knew was that I craved Jake with an almost feral desperation. Moral scruples be damned. He took my hand and led me to his car. "My place isn't far," he said, eyes blazing with naked longing. "If you're sure about this." I swallowed hard and gave a breathless nod. "I'm sure." In the hot rapture of Jake's bed, tangled amongst rumpled sheets, I momentarily forgot about his wife's existence. When he touched me, murmured salacious endearments against my skin, I was able to suspend reality and believe I was the only woman in his world. Afterwards, spent and glowing, Jake pulled me into his arms with a contented sigh. "That was incredible. You're incredible." I nestled against his chiseled chest, inhaling his sandalwood scent, and felt dangerously secure in that blissed-out lull. Like this deliciously torrid tryst could seamlessly weave itself into something more permanent. That's when I noticed it. The glint of gold on Jake's ring finger. The pristine wedding band I'd somehow missed or blocked out in the heated frenzy. My stomach plummeted as the guilt and shame came crashing back in waves. What was I doing? This wasn't the start of some erotic love affair. This was just tawdry infidelity, plain and simple. I had willingly become the other woman. Jake must have sensed my sudden unease as he tilted my chin up with his fingertips. "Hey, you okay?" I searched his gorgeous face, those eternal bedroom eyes, that perfectly tousled hair. I don't know if I can do this," I whispered tremulously. "Your wife." Something inscrutable flickered across Jake's expression before he pulled me close again, brushing his lips along the sensitive curve of my neck. "Don't think about her right now," he murmured in that sinfully persuasive voice. "Just think about us." And like a weak-willed fool, I allowed myself to be seduced again, all lingering guilt subsumed by the exquisite haze of desire. Over the next few months, Jake and I fell into a perilous routine of lengthy texts and clandestine meetings. At dingy motels, quiet alcoves, whatever secret corners we could carve out, I became utterly intoxicated and consumed by this torrid double life, the thrill of subterfuge heightening every heated encounter. That is, until the shocking day Jake showed up at the office with a new hire trailing behind him. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my brother Carter," he announced, placing a proud hand on the shoulder of the fresh-faced young man. "He'll be joining us in marketing." I felt the blood drain from my face as I took in Carter's familiar mop of sandy hair, his striking blue eyes that were an exact mirror of Jake's. This was no brother. This was Jake's wife. Suddenly, every secret rendezvous, every whispered endearment took on a sickening new sheen. Jake wasn't just a cheater. He was a skilled con artist and sociopath. He'd been lying to me from the start. As Carter's, no, his wife's, gaze landed on me with a bright smile. I felt like I might actually vomit right there in the marketing bullpen. How could I have been so blind? So naively trusting of a man who had spun an entire fake persona to satisfy his depraved desires? In that gutting moment, I realized Jake would never leave his wife. His deceptions and double life were too intricately woven, too perfectly executed. I was just another expendable thread in his meticulously constructed web of lies. I knew I should confess everything to his wife, let the truth burst into the light no matter how disgracefully it showered down on me. She deserved to see Jake for the skilled fabulist he truly was. But part of me, the cowardly, self-preserving part, worried if I unraveled this sordid tale, I would only become more entangled and ensnared in the sticky consequences. Like residents of Jake's warped psyche, we were all currently trapped in the gilded cage of his own deranged making, so for now I'd have to play along, act oblivious while Jake's twisted mind games continued unfolding. But the truth couldn't stay buried forever. No matter how intricate the deceptions, all lies is splendid unraveling eventually. And I had a sinking feeling Jake's grand unraveling would be more ruinous than any of us could fathom.